Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This is Infertility. In this show, we usually help people share their experiences with fertility and family building, but today we have something a bit different. Today, we're going to hear from Dr. Mark Leondires and licensed clinical social worker Lisa Schuman to learn about a recent book collaboration titled Building Your Family, The Complete Guide to Donor Conception. We're going to find out what you need to know, and they're going to give you all the tips and tricks that they have accumulated. So if you're interested in reproductive services or donor conception, well, this episode is for you. I'm Dan Bolger with Progeny, and this is Infertility. All right, let's dive right in and get to know our guests.
My name is Lisa Schuman. I'm a therapist. I'm the podcast host of Donor Conception Conversations, and I run a group called the Center for Family Building.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mark Leondires, Dr. L. My story, as far as how I've come to partner with Lisa writing this book, comes from 25 years as a reproductive endocrinologist, taking care of regular infertility patients, and then, going on my pathway to family building as a gay man with a husband, working with a donor and a surrogate, and realizing how complicated it was. And that led me to, with the support of my partners and the practice, kind of transitioning Illume Fertility to be a fully inclusive practice for the entire LGBTQ plus community and founding Gay Parents to Be. It also led me to focus my practice much more on donor conception throughout the LGBTQ plus community.
So it's safe to say that these two have the appropriate backgrounds to be considered experts when it comes to donor conception. So it made a lot of sense for them to write a book together.
You can only see so many patients in a day, and it's really important to get good information. There's a lot of stuff going on the internet that's really hard to navigate and hard to decipher. And so we wanted to really help people build the family of their dreams because they deserve to have the family of their dreams.
Okay, so the book is a comprehensive guide that really dives deep into the things that you need to know. But Dr. Leondires was quick to point something out.
As somebody who spent their whole life reading textbooks, it's not a textbook. We integrated into the book our patient stories, obviously de-identified and generalized somewhat, so people can maybe find their pathway within the book. Medicine right now is all about personalization. And within the book, I think people can find find parts that apply to them, and some parts apply to everyone.
So the book is about donor conception, thinking about donor conception, how to start thinking about it, whether you're a patient with infertility issues, medical issues, if you're a same-sex couple, if you're somebody who has been transitioning. No matter why you need donor conception, we cover it all, how to start to think about it, how different people feel about it. And then we start to talk about the process, the medical process, the genetic process, how to choose a donor, how to talk to your kids about being donor conceived, and then stress reduction, because of course this is very stressful.
For anyone thinking about conceiving using a donor, there's a lot to think about when it comes to choosing that donor.
Many parents-to-be naively go into the process of, I'm going to find somebody who I like the way they look, right? Or, in fact, I was just speaking to somebody recently, somebody who I might want to date, right? But that's not really the right way to search a donor. The takeaway from the book comes down to, flipping the script on how to choose a donor.
Patients come together with so many difficulties. They come into groups, they come into individual counseling, they come into the clinics, and they have so many questions. Who remembers their 10th grade biology? Who knows how difficult it is to see a genetic counselor and what you can really do in the genetic counselor's office? And there's so much more that you can use a genetic counselor for that people don't even think about. So we really address, yes, the psychological, how to choose a donor and how to talk to your children, but the medical process is dizzying for patients, and it's really helpful for them just to have a guide to be able to walk them through how this works. I think a lot of people come into their first appointment with their doctor and they feel like they're listening to Charlie Brown talking, Charlie Brown's teacher used to go, wow, wow, wow. They can't even imagine what their doctor's saying, right? And so it's so helpful for them just to have this guide. This is how this works. And it really can be very comforting to have that. So we wanted to put all of those pieces into this puzzle.
So let's get right into it. If people shouldn't be looking for someone that they should date, well, what should they be looking for in a donor?
So medically choosing a donor, you want to think about your own family history and the donor's family history. And I've said this a couple different ways already, but you are not getting that person. You are getting their paternal and maternal generations, probably 5 back. And it's naive for you to think when you look at that nice picture on Facebook, you're going to have a child that looks like that person, and looks are less important than medical well-being, right? Within our own genetic code, we have 46 chromosomes, 52,000 genes, and we all likely carry some genes that are broken. And using recessive carrier screening to look for genes like cystic fibrosis or Tay-Sachs disease is really essential to move the needle towards your child's health. You don't want to magnify or replicate the risks that you have in your family in the donor you choose, but you also want to be really clear that you're not donating a broken gene that you have in your family tree without being sure that the donor doesn't have the same broken gene, because in that case, there's a 25% chance that child has that disease.
Yeah, one part of donor conception that is sometimes overlooked is, well, the children themselves. But there's actually a good amount to think about when it comes to communicating with children about their conception and backgrounds.
For me, I will freely say that I learned from Lisa, because Lisa does a program for donor-conceived adoption children, about the things that the kids struggle with, right? Writing this book brought me back to some stories about my children being approached at the playground who didn't, although we thought they understood how they came to life. Kids don't always remember things, who came home one day and asked if they were adopted, right? Which is not their story, right? And adoption is another beautiful family building method, but it's not something that we did in our family, right? So I learned a lot. It was a lot of self-reflection, and it's writing the book, I think, is and was helpful for me taking care of my family.
We talked a little bit about process, and we've talked about the children themselves, but there's another piece of donor conception that might not always come into play, but it really shouldn't be ignored for those who experience it. And that's grief. Grief that could be associated with the idea that one won't be having a genetic offspring.
So I think there's a whole spectrum of grief. And yes, there are some people. I had a patient who said, and this is when I was working with Dr. Leondires, this patient said, if I had to make a cake, I would make the cake the same way from scratch as I would from a Betty Crocker mix. It doesn't really matter. The cake's a cake. And she really had no issues stepping into the donor conception world. But I'm sure there were moments where she felt that I'm not going to be using my genetics, and what's it going to mean for me? What's it going to mean for the children? What's it going to mean for my relationship with my partner? And is the child going to love me the same? Am I going to feel the same about the child if I'm not genetically connected? So I'm sure there were at some point, some moments. So that's on one side of the spectrum. And then you have people in the queer community, single parents, all kinds of people in this world who just kind of know that they're going to use donor conception for a long time. They've wrapped their mind around it, and it's part of their life, and they come into the office in a different way. And then you have people who are grieving over the loss of their genetic connection. And then you have people who can't do it, who just say, if I'm not going to parent with my own genetics, I'd rather not be a parent. So I think there's a very, very wide range of people's experiences.
As I said at the top, the book is called Building Your Family, The Complete Guide to Donor Conception. It's readily available wherever you might find books. I got mine from Amazon. And there's an audiobook version, so pick that up if audio is how you like to read books. I want to thank Lisa and Dr. Leondires for joining us today and for all of the work that they do every day for their patients and really for the fertility and family building community at large. I also want to thank you for listening. If you want to connect with us on Instagram, you can do that at This Is Infertility Podcast. You can follow Progeny at Progeny Inc. Of course, if you're listening on a podcast app, please leave a rating and review. Those really help. This Is Infertility is brought to you by Progeny. Please remember this podcast is not intended to substitute for the personalized expert advice of your physician. I'm Dan Bolger, and this is Infertility.